The refugee stations in the Carthus Belt were silent. No laughter, no shouts, not even the restless cries of children echoed in the halls. Only the endless hum of life support machines filled the void, a mechanical heartbeat for a species that no longer believed it had a future. For centuries, humanity had been known as the optimists of the galaxy, stubborn dreamers who always looked toward the horizon. But now the Council was about to see what becomes of them when that light is extinguished. Commander Elian Rourke sat in the chamber, his posture straight, his face unreadable. Around him, alien senators whispered in tones thick with disdain. The humans, they said, were finished. Their world was ash, their colonies fractured, their children born in exile. What power could a people without a home possibly command? Yet even as the questions rippled through the chamber, Rourke did not flinch. Outside the great windows, the pale light of the belt's suns glared across skeletal stations orbiting among shattered asteroids. Once these rocks had been mined by human hands, their veins rich with minerals that rebuilt fleets and fueled prosperity. Now they floated abandoned, half-dead husks tethered to a species that no longer believed in tomorrow. The Council saw weakness, but in silence Rourke carried something else entirely. One senator leaned closer, his scaled lips curling in contempt. What can a dying race possibly demand? The chamber chuckled. A cruel sound carried through the vaulted hall. Rourke's eyes shifted only slightly, his jaw tightening with the faintest tremor. He let them laugh. He let them believe the lie, for belief was its own prison. The silence that followed was heavier than the insult itself. Across the chamber, holograms flickered to life. Images of ruined colonies and starved settlements rippled across the air, each more harrowing than the last. A burned village on Callan Reach, a shipyard littered with drifting hulls. Children wrapped in threadbare blankets beneath failing heaters. Every picture whispered the same story of people who had lost their hope, and the Council, like carrion birds, circled closer. Rourke finally moved. His hands rested on a worn data slate, the metal edges dulled by years of use. He tapped a sequence with deliberate calm, each press echoing in the silence like a distant drumbeat. The senators leaned in, curious now, their smugness slipping into something colder. What could possibly lie inside that slate? Why did the human's face remain so calm? The chamber's laughter died. Even the whispering ceased. For the first time in decades, the galaxy's rulers looked at a human and felt the faintest quiver of unease. Rourke's eyes swept across them with the weight of centuries. His voice came low, measured, almost sorrowful. "You wanted proof," he said, "of what we have become." Elian Rourke opened the data slate. Inside was something the galaxy had prayed never to see again. High above the Council chambers, the human vessel, Dauntless, drifted in silence. Her crew moved like shadows across steel corridors, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. They were soldiers without songs, guardians who no longer believed there was a dawn to defend. Once ships like this had carried explorers to uncharted stars. Now they carried the weight of extinction on their backs. For 100 years, humanity had scattered across the colonies, clinging to fragile worlds and orbital stations. Earth was gone, its oceans poisoned, its skies torn by storms that never ceased. One by one, the outer colonies faltered, famine clawing at their people, uprisings burning through what little stability remained. The Council had stepped in with words of protection, but always at a cost tribute in minerals, labor, and obedience. In time, the proud species became beggars in a galaxy they once inspired. In the chamber, a counselor spoke with thinly veiled mockery. "You are finished," he said. "A people without soil, without sky, without future. What possible claim could you bring before this assembly?" The words spread like oil across water, feeding whispers and sneers. Rourke did not answer. He only raised his gaze, his silence heavier than a threat. Why did his calm unsettle them more than anger ever could? A second counselor leaned forward, voice sharper, meant to wound. "You have lost your fire." The accusation hung in the air, but Rourke's lips parted in the faintest ghost of a smile. His reply was quiet, a whisper almost swallowed by the chamber's stillness. "Fire does not die. he said. It condenses. The counselors stilled, uncertain if they had just heard a warning or a prophecy. Above on the Dauntless, alarms flickered without sound. Long dormant consoles came alive, their lights pulsing red across darkened panels. Forgotten codes sealed for centuries spread through hidden relays. Across the void, in scattered asteroid belts and derelict stations, ancient beacons awoke, one by one. A low hum filled the chamber as transmissions pulsed through frequencies thought abandoned. For the first time, unease rippled through the assembly. Something was stirring, something long hidden, long restrained. The laughter and mockery died, replaced by the kind of silence that precedes storms, and at the center of it, Elian Rourke lowered his hand from the data slate, his expression calm, his voice unshaken. The chamber lights dimmed as a signal left the room, streaking through subspace toward forgotten coordinates. Far beyond, across the dark edge of the belt, war beacons flared to life for the first time in 200 years. In the darkness of the Karthus belt, something ancient stirred. Vast vaults buried inside hollow asteroids unlocked with a groan that echoed across vacuum. The silence of centuries cracked as titanic shapes rose from shadows, each one coated in the dust of forgotten years. These were not ships of explorers or dreamers. They were relics of grief, forged in exile, born from despair itself. On the council floor, murmurs turned to sharp, panicked whispers. "What are those?" demanded a senator, his frilled crest trembling. No one answered. The holograms displayed rising dreadnoughts, their hulls dark, their surfaces scarred with names etched in iron. New London, Lagos, Jakarta, Warsaw, cities long dead carved forever into steel. They were not just weapons, they were tombs given engines, memorials given teeth. A counselor gasped, her voice shaking. "These are not warships. These are coffins." The words rippled through the chamber like thunder. For a moment, even the most hostile delegates leaned back, struck by something deeper than fear. The images showed blackened alloys gleaming under fractured starlight, engines glowing like the embers of a funeral pyre. Every hull whispered a promise humanity had not forgotten, and it had not forgiven. On the Dauntless, young cadets stared at the sight on their consoles. One child born in orbit and never once touched by soil whispered the question no adult dared voice. "If hope is gone, what are we fighting for?" The silence that followed was crushing. Rourke answered without hesitation. "For survival." His voice was a blade, sharp, unyielding, and final. Then the spike hit. Beacons blazed in unison, chains of light across the belt, signaling commands lost to history. Dreadnoughts powered alive, reactors roaring like awakening gods. The void trembled as thousands of cannons extended from their armored hulls, hidden for centuries beneath asteroid skin. The chamber shook as live feeds revealed the scale of it, each vessel rising like a titan pulled from the grave. The council erupted in chaos. Some shouted for immediate disarmament. Others demanded sanctions, panicked that such power had been hidden in silence for so long. Yet through it all, Rourke sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the holograms, hands steady upon the slate. He did not explain. He did not reassure. He only let them see what despair had built. A senator cried out, "What madness is this? What have you unleashed?" No answer came. Only the image of the First Fleet pivoting as one, black ships aligning with mathematical precision. The stars themselves seemed to dim around their formation. And as the chamber watched in frozen silence, Commander Elian Rourke's voice broke through, quiet and absolute. "This is what remains when hope is gone." The council chamber seethed with chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, voices rising in fear and fury, their polished decorum shattering under the weight of what they had just seen. Some called for sanctions, others for an immediate military response. A few whispered the unthinkable that humanity should be appeased, not challenged. In the midst of the uproar, Elian Rourke did not move. He simply waited, his silence louder than their panic. A counselor from the Zevran clans struck the floor with his staff, demanding order. "These vessels are illegal under every interstellar accord. Humanity has violated every oath it swore." Yet even as his words thundered across the hall, his eyes betrayed something more primitive. It was not outrage that shook him. It was fear. Fear that he was staring at a power carefully hidden, waiting for this very moment. Then came the mocking voice. A Varathi warlord, his scaled jaw split in a grin, leaned forward with disdain. You build coffins and dare to parade them as ships? Empty husks, wielded by a hollow people. You are nothing but ghosts rattling your chains. His laughter filled the chamber, sharp and cruel, meant to remind all that the Varathi had broken empires before. The chamber shifted, tension teetering on the edge of violence. Rourke raised his eyes, and for the first time, he allowed the faintest edge of emotion to sharpen his words. Is that so? He asked, calm and deadly. Above chamber, the Dauntless moved. Without warning, a silent transmission streaked across space, a command coded in despair. Moments later, the Varathi flagship, hovering in orbit, flickered across every display in the hall. Its engines dimmed, its weapons powered down, its systems choked one by one. The Varathi warlord froze, his grin vanishing as alarms flared on the holograms. His ship was alive, yet helpless. Its crew scrambled, shouting in panic. But their weapons were gone, their shields blind. Not a single shot had been fired. Not a single life was taken. And yet the vessel, a symbol of Varathi strength, had been reduced to silence in seconds. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some delegates recoiled in shock, others whispered in awe. The truth settled over them like a suffocating weight. Humanity's new weapons were not built for spectacle. They were precise, surgical, mercilessly efficient. The message was clear. This was not power unleashed in rage. It was control, deliberate and absolute. Rourke leaned forward, his voice low enough to force the chamber into silence. Without hope, we no longer dream of peace, he said. His gaze swept across them all, steady and unflinching. We only prepare for inevitability. The chamber fell utterly still. For the first time in centuries, the council realized they were not looking at a broken species. They were staring into the eyes of something far more dangerous. The chamber shook with panic. Delegates argued, shouted, demanded explanations. But above them, far beyond the safety of their halls, the true demonstration had already begun. Humanity had not just built ships, they had built silence. In the void, the dreadnoughts moved. Engines roared once, then cut. They glided like shadows across the belt, their cannons tracking with inhuman precision. A Varathi battle group rose to intercept, confident in its strength. They never reached firing distance. The first strike was soundless. One flash of light, then nothing. No explosion, no wreckage. The Varathi warship vanished from every display, erased in an instant. Crew, weapons, hull, gone. Not even debris remained to mark its passing. Gasps erupted across the council chamber. Where are the fragments? Where is the wreckage? A second ship followed, and then a third, erased from existence with surgical efficiency. The galaxy had seen war before: firestorms, bombardments, fleets burning in spectacle. But this was different. This was erasure. On the Dauntless, the crew watched in silence. No cheering, no cries of triumph. Their faces were still, their eyes hollow. To them, this was not victory. It was survival. Each erasure was a reminder that hope was gone, and what remained was colder than vengeance. Rourke's voice carried into the chamber, steady, merciless. You will find no smoke, no ruins, no trace. Oblivion leaves nothing to mourn, nothing to bury. His words fell like iron, echoing against marble walls. Delegates turned pale. Some pressed shaking hands against their consoles. The weight of what they witnessed was heavier than fire, heavier than blood. 3 more Varathi ships disappeared. Not a shot fired in return. Not a scream carried across the void. Only the clean, surgical silence of despair given form. It was power beyond fear, beyond rage. It was control absolute. Rourke rose from his seat at last, his figure framed against the fading glow of the holograms. Now, he whispered, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. You see what remains when hope is gone. The council chamber sat in dead silence. Even the air seemed to hesitate, as if the galaxy itself had forgotten how to breathe. The council chamber sat paralyzed. No one spoke, no one moved. The echoes of silence from the battlefield weighed heavier than any explosion could have. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's rulers understood the true danger of despair. Humanity had not unleashed fury. They had perfected absence. Some delegates leaned back in horror, their eyes wide with the dawning realization that the species they had mocked had transformed into something they could neither fight nor understand. Others whispered desperately among themselves, voices trembling as they debated the unthinkable. Could this be the new order? Would despair itself become the foundation of human power? The questions whispered in the chamber cut sharper than any weapon. In a shadowed corner, a young diplomat clutched a recording device, her hands trembling as she captured the feeds of vanished ships. Her voice, nearly broken, carried a question to the chamber's floor. Are they saviors now? Or monsters? The words echoed, unanswered, across the great hall. No one dared to look at Rourke when she said it. Beyond the chamber, survivors huddled in orbiting stations. A child scribbled into a tattered journal with a hand-me-down stylus. His words were simple, fragile, almost innocent. I do not know if my people still dream, but I know they still endure. His small hand trembled, yet his script did not falter. Even in despair, endurance remained etched into every stroke. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. Scouts whispered of ruins on Earth that glowed once more, as if something stirred beneath the poisoned skies. Delegates murmured of old colonies, long written off as lost, suddenly returning faint signals. Was humanity truly beyond hope? Or had despair only been the mask that concealed their return? The uncertainty bled into every word spoken. A counselor leaned forward, his scaled face pale beneath the chamber's light. If their despair makes them this strong, what happens when they find hope again? The silence that followed was more terrifying than any answer. Every delegate in that chamber knew the truth. Hope might not just restore humanity. It might remake them into something unstoppable. Then a transmission arrived. It carried across the chamber with the sharp tone of urgency. A signal, weak but undeniable, from a colony thought dead for over a century. A world erased from the maps, now calling out into the dark. The chamber erupted again, but this time not with laughter or scorn. This time the sound was fear. The signal pulsed again, weak but steady, carrying across the void like a heartbeat refusing to die. A lost colony, erased from records and memory, had survived. The council chamber erupted in disbelief, voices clashing as delegates demanded answers. But all eyes turned to Rourke. He did not move, his gaze locked on the trembling signal, as if hearing something only he could understand. On the Dauntless, the message played across the bridge. Grainy images flickered into view, children running in streets of dust, farmers kneeling in fields of stubborn crops, voices singing in broken harmony. They carried seeds, songs, fragments of art thought destroyed. It was hope, fragile and incomplete, but hope nonetheless. And in that moment, every hollow-eyed crewman felt the weight of their silence begin to crack. Yet hope was not a gift without cost. Enemy fleets still gathered at the edges of human space, terrified of what they had seen, desperate to strike before despair consumed them all. The council demanded Rourke unleash his new fleet, to burn those enemies into nothing, to prove humanity's control once and for all. But the message from the lost colony lingered, a reminder that survival was not the same as living. "Commander," a voice whispered on the bridge, "if we stop now, do we show weakness or strength?" The question hung like a blade, sharp and heavy. Rourke's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between the signal of hope and the live feeds of enemy ships. He had the power to erase them all, to end the war in silence and fear. Yet to do so might lock humanity forever into despair, a people defined only by what they destroyed. The council chamber froze as Rourke rose from his seat. His voice was calm, but the tension beneath it was unyielding. Without hope, we endured. Without hope, we became what you now fear. He paused, his hand hovering over the slate that would unleash final annihilation. But if hope returns, then the galaxy will face something far greater. Every delegate held their breath. The council hall seemed to shrink, the weight of his choice pressing down like gravity itself. Would humanity remain the embodiment of despair, wielding Oblivion Protocol to erase their enemies forever? Or would they reclaim the fragile light of hope, and in doing so, redefine the future of every world watching? Rourke's hand lowered slowly toward the console. The lights of the chamber dimmed, the tension wound to breaking. All around the galaxy, ships and stations waited for a signal that would decide their fate. And in the silence before his command, the galaxy trembled. The chamber lights steadied as Commander Elian Rourke lowered his hand. For a moment it seemed the galaxy itself had paused, waiting to see if despair would erase entire civilizations. But the order never came. Instead, Rourke spoke with the calm weight of a man who had stared into the abyss and chosen not to fall. "Without hope we endured," he said, "but survival's not enough. Today we choose more." On the Dauntless, the crew exhaled as one. Weapons remained primed, fleets stood ready, but the final command was never given. Instead, orders spread across the network. Capture, not annihilation. Enemy vessels were disabled, their crews taken alive. The void that had trembled with fear now carried something stranger restraint. Humanity, once mocked as broken, proved that despair had forged discipline as sharp as steel. The council shifted uneasily in their seats. Some delegates whispered relief, others whispered dread. For in sparing their enemies, humanity had revealed a greater truth. They no longer sought vengeance or validation. They sought control not through destruction, but through the choice to hold back. That, the council realized, was far more terrifying than firepower. Days later, the captured fleets were paraded into orbit, stripped of weapons, their crews fed instead of executed. Humanity's message echoed through every channel. Despair had given them strength, but hope had returned to guide it. "Without hope, we survive," Rourke declared before the council. "With hope, we lead." The words struck like iron, shaping the silence into something new. Across distant colonies, children looked upward and whispered with awe. The species that had lost its home was no longer defined by its ruins. It was defined by the choice to rise from them. For the first time in generations, humanity was not seen as the weakest link of the galaxy, but as the one force capable of changing its course. And yet, as celebrations began, whispers spread of Earth. Ruins that glowed when no reactor remained. Signals faint and fractured, buried beneath storms that had swallowed oceans. Some said it was only noise, echoes of a dead planet. Others claimed it was something else, something waiting. Rourke stood alone at the viewport of the Dauntless, watching the stars wheel slowly past. His hand brushed the console, but he did not speak. Beyond the hum of engines, beyond the silence of the void, he thought he heard a whisper from a world no one dared to return to. The day humanity regained its hope was the day the galaxy's story changed forever. But deep within the shadows of Earth, something stirred.